one of the things that we are privileged to do is work with banks and financial institutions, but also central banks and regulators around the world as they're looking to implement open finance. And I think we're seeing an awful lot of countries really build on the learnings and leapfrog what's happened in markets like the UK and in Europe and Brazil. Just on that point there, I spent some time talking to one of the regulators in Southeast Asia, and there one of the challenges is actually just not enough people have any savings for when they can no longer work, and all of the burdens on the families. So they were seeing this as a get open finance route right. It's a way to build longer term savings that then unlocks a much broader GDP opportunity for the whole family unit. And as I look around the world, I think we're starting to see more and more countries genuinely see this as important national digital infrastructure. I mean, India's the classic example the India stack, where they started with digital ID that has allowed them to really tackle financial inclusion in a way we've never seen before.
And quickly and at scale.
Frighteningly quickly.
I mean, I was going to mention India because my husband's Indian, and I don't know very much about the sort of overall infrastructure there. But what I do know, and I do find astonishing, is how quickly they've been able to digitise, and as you say, and therefore improve financial inclusion across the whole country of 1 billion people. And they've done that, in the last decade? And so what else is to come with open banking and more sort of push information to customers? I think it's super exciting.
And that's it. They had a really clear view of the objectives. What does it look like if you get it right? If it can give digital identity and the ability to sign to the entire population, more can open accounts. Then if you have digital account-to-account payments, you can shift away from cash, even in all of the street vendors. It's been incredible. And we're now seeing, I think, more and more countries recognise, actually done well, this becomes core digital infrastructure that drives innovation, inward investment, growth in the economy. Part of that, actually, so again, we're involved in helping implement national open finance infrastructure. So it takes the heavy lifting away from the banks and gets the whole market there much more quickly. But it looks different around the world. You've dealt with a lot of central banks and regulators around the world. Do you think there are sort of criteria for countries that are just better and faster at innovation? What's the key here, I think?
So in my experience of thinking about, as you say, central banks or companies around the world, I would say that most countries look at what other countries have done, if you see what I mean. And so certainly in my earlier days in banking, we always used to look to Australia, because Australia always seemed to lead in terms of innovation in financial services and the regulatory environment, which was always interesting. I think Singapore obviously is a country that's super innovative. I see that in terms of how they manage, for example, VAT. I think I'm right in saying they're one of the first countries to invoice and account for VAT at source rather than it coming in subsequently, and that's helped with cash flow and sort of tax compliance, if you like. And so I think it's really important that we learn from those individual countries. And on balance, I would say that the difference, once the individual company leaders or central banks have been clear on what they want to do, is all around risk and regulation. I think personally, countries like Singapore perhaps that might be prepared to take a little bit more risk because they're a smaller country and they can test out some things. I think that's really good to keep an eye on that. I mean, you see a lot of the Middle East, and obviously they are also looking to be really innovative in what they offer. And you probably want to talk a little bit about innovation there.
Yeah, it has been really interesting. And again, we're working in markets all around the world. But the Middle East has some really interesting things going on. Yeah. I mean, I think in a number of countries, there's a concerted central effort to accelerate and transform not just economies, but societies as well.
Exactly.
Movements to reduce long-term dependency on oil revenues, movements to, I guess, open up societies, drive more inward investment, more mobility. I think certainly Saudi Arabia and the UAE, we're seeing a huge amount of interesting innovation, lots and lots of investment dollars going into Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The UAE, there's a huge focus on, again, that phrase, national digital infrastructure.
Yeah.
And this isn't just open finance. The open finance space, they're doing some really interesting stuff. So it is a very broad open finance agenda with a different implementation model. So they recognize that to move faster than any other market, you have to take a lot of the heavy lifting away from all of the market players. So there's been an investment in central open finance infrastructure, which is getting the market there much more quickly. But they've also recognized it needs to have a sustainable commercial model. So what's taken the UK 8 years to just start getting a commercial scheme around open banking payments, that's there from day one in the UAE. But
because they've learned from the UK, presumably, as much as
absolutely. And actually, they looked at a lot of the market. They looked at UK, they looked at Korea, they looked at Brazil, they looked at India, did a great job of piecing together the best learnings. But this all fits within a much broader national digital innovation agenda where they are creating a lot of sovereign infrastructure. There's central bank digital currency, there's digital identity, all of the, again, similar to the India stack, all of the foundations that really create the next version of a modern economy. It's impressive to see, and I think we're about to see another 4 or 5 markets go down a similar route of central national infrastructure. But it takes quite a strong will, because there'll still be the challenge of the banks saying, oh, we're not sure if we want to do this or we can move quickly enough. So it does take, it takes kind of will and strong direction.
Which is why I think the governments and regulators need to be behind it. Because, as you say, I think we can see economic benefit from it, but as a consequence, I can see real social benefit. Surely it starts to, equalise people, if that's the right way of putting it, if everybody has access to their own data. Now, they may not, have the same data. I might not have the same data as you or the same abilities as you, but at least I can see what they are, and therefore I've got an opportunity to move forwards. And, I think it's really interesting that this is something that's taking off across the world. And it's taking off in, countries like India, huge countries, Brazil, that really want to change society and improve the lot for, literally billions of people. And so I think that organisations, governments ought to see this as I say, something with social benefit as well as economic benefit. And that's why I'm so excited about it, because I think it's a world-changing opportunity, and we mustn't let that go.
Yeah, I mean, when we started the Ozone API journey, that was really, there were 2 core foundations behind the thinking. One was actually done well. This should be a really powerful force for good and growth,
exactly,
both at a societal level and an economic level. But also, this is really hard to do for the banks and financial institutions. How do we take away the headache of delivering the secure APIs? I'm personally really excited to see. So the Middle East, there's some really interesting stuff going on. I think the potential for positive impacts across Africa is enormous.
Yeah, I agree.
And Southeast Asia are a number of the markets as well, because it looks a little different there. There you have, so the financial inclusion landscape's different, but so much of the day-to-day transactional activity happens in wallets. So if you can open up that source of data and then enable that to increase access to credit, that's such an economic stimulant for markets. So I think there's a lot of really exciting stuff to come.
I agree. And, you started off actually talking about access to credit, and I completely agree that that's something that open banking can massively help, and AI, of course, but those two, the access to data there, so important. You know, when I was starting off with the Virgin Money credit card a long time ago, what we used to refer to as automated underwriting was definitely a win-win for the bank, because it was cheaper to do the underwriting and manage the risk, and the individual because they got an answer quicker. And the more accurate data you can get, and the more organisations can access that data, first of all, the easier it is to provide credit, but secondly, the easier it is to price that risk properly. And, you know, when I started off, risk wasn't really priced for the individual. It was priced for individual groups of people, big groups of people. And now, you know, the ability is there through this sort of capability to price your risk compared to my risk individually. And again, I think that's really helpful.
I think one of the things countries have really been learning from previous implementations is one, the importance of setting really clear objectives. What is the national good that we're trying to achieve, and therefore how do you measure it? Because that then almost creates the stepping stones of, okay, if these are the objectives, what are the right use cases we need to enable? To enable those use cases, what are the changes, or what's the regulatory framework you need to create? And how do you take existing global best-in-class standards and make sure they work in the market? Then the implementation, it's how do you think through what infrastructure do you provide to the market versus what do you ask the market to build? And then finally, how do you build the commercial overlays on top of that so that there's a sustainable
reward, yeah.
And we're seeing, I mean, it's a conversation we have regularly with central banks, but a much clearer path for how do you think about and design this stuff, which I think is only to the benefit of each market. And I think, again, as we get into open finance and smart data in the UK, I think the UK will be able to benefit from following others rather than being the trail finder.
Yeah. And I think, you know, your point about national digital infrastructure is really important, because I think countries will be needing to think about that at the highest level, and then open banking and open finance will be part of that strategy, not the whole strategy, but a really important part. But, you know, surely in the end, whenever the end is, or, you know, at the optimal point of digital, if you like, that's what all countries are going to have a national digital infrastructure. I don't know how far away that is, but it's going fast. I think we're getting there faster now than we ever have.
And there's great proof points. So we talked about India, but there are certain markets that are really getting this right, and others can look to it.